The old man froze in his tracks when he saw the shape on the far ridge. At first, it looked like a trick of the light, a shadow stretching across the Montana hills at sunrise. But as the gold morning glow settled on the land, Elijah Anderson felt his heartbeat climb into his throat. The horse on that ridge moved with a gait he knew better than his own breath. It couldn't be. Aurora had been gone for 3 long years. Yet there she stood, alive, watching him from the hilltop like a ghost come home. 5 years earlier, Elijah had been 68, still working the same rugged patch of Montana land his grandfather carved out with nothing but grit and a borrowed wagon. Folks called it the Rocking A Ranch, 800 acres of tough grass, cold streams, and pine-covered ridges that looked as old as time itself. Elijah lived alone in that valley, shaping his days around cattle drives, fencing repairs, and the quiet sounds of a life spent outdoors. He had never married, not because he didn't want to, but because ranch work left little room for anything except sweat, sun, and long nights. Aurora filled that empty space. She was a paint mare with a warm cream coat marked by deep chocolate patches. Elijah had raised her from a foal. After her mother died in a difficult birth, she grew into a smart, loyal working horse, the kind that sensed storms before the clouds formed and danger before a man ever saw it. Neighbors used to say she was touched by spirit wind. Elijah didn't know about that, but he knew she understood him in a way no human ever had. The winter that changed his life hit the Montana Valley earlier than usual. By mid-November, icy wind tore across the land, and frost clung to the grass even at midday. Elijah had seen plenty of hard winters, but something in the air felt different. The horses grew restless, especially Aurora. She paced the fence line every morning, stopping now and then to stare at the eastern mountains, as if they were whispering secrets only she could hear. Elijah spent those days hauling hay, checking the barn, tightening fences, making sure every living thing on the ranch had what it needed. Aurora followed him everywhere, brushing her nose against his shoulder now and then, but her eyes always drifted back toward the mountains. Then came the blizzard. December 19th dawned with a sky as white as milk and a wind that cut like a knife. By noon, the storm slammed into the valley with a force Elijah had not felt in decades. Snow whipped across the land so fiercely he could barely see his own barn door. The temperature dropped fast, far below anything safe, and the power went out before the first lantern was lit. Elijah worked through the storm, checking the horses every few hours. Aurora stood close to him each time, warm breath rolling into the freezing air. Once the storm fully settled over the land, she seemed to calm, but Elijah could feel something tight inside her, like she was listening for something he couldn't hear. It happened just before dawn. A loud banging woke him. Not the wind, not the shutters, something heavier, rhythmic, coming from the barn. Elijah pulled on his boots and coat and fought his way through snow so deep it nearly swallowed his legs. When he reached the barn, he felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. The barn door was wide open, slamming against the wall in the violent wind. Snow had blown in. So far, the floor had disappeared under white drifts. Elijah ran inside, lantern shaking in his hand, and counted the horses. Aurora was gone. Every instinct in him screamed to saddle up and ride after her, but no man or horse could survive that storm. The wind was too strong. The cold was too lethal. Even tracks wouldn't last a minute under that crushing snow. Elijah closed the door, secured the barn, and waited out the storm with a heart heavier than the mountains around him. For the first time in years, the old ranch felt empty. When the blizzard finally died 2 days later, Elijah went searching. He rode his best horse across miles of freezing land, checking every hollow, every sheltered place a frightened mare might hide. Neighbors rode with him. Ranchers across the valley kept an eye out. Word spread fast, and folks reported seeing a lone horse far in the mountains, always just out of reach, always moving. But none of the sightings brought Aurora home. Weeks turned into months. Snow melted, spring warmed the air, and Elijah kept looking. He rode farther than he ever had before, across valleys most folks never set foot in. Sometimes he found hoof prints, bark stripped from trees, or places where a horse had bedded down, but nothing solid. Nothing that said, "I'm here." Then winter returned again, and Elijah, now 70, kept his hope buried deep where the wind couldn't tear it away. But grief settled into the ranch like a shadow that wouldn't move. Aurora was gone. At least, that's what he believed. Until that October morning, 3 years later, when he looked up at the ridge and saw the mare he had raised from birth, standing tall against the golden sky. And she wasn't alone. Aurora did not move at first. She stood on the ridge as still as a painted carving, her mane tossing slightly in the cool October breeze. But it was the smaller shape beside her that made Elijah forget to breathe. A young horse stood half hidden behind her, watching him with wide, alert eyes. The colt, or maybe a filly, carried Aurora's same cream base and bold dark patches, but there was something wild in its posture. Something untrained and untouched by any human hand. Elijah stepped forward slowly, careful not to startle them. The air felt thin, charged in a way he had not felt since he was a young man. The land was so quiet that he could hear the soft rustle of dry grass under his boots. Aurora lifted her head, ears forward, and for a moment Elijah felt the years fall away. She looked just as she had before that terrible storm took her from him, older, leaner, marked by the mountains, yet unmistakably the same soul. When she finally moved, she didn't run. She walked, calm, deliberate, confident, down the slope toward the ranch she once called home. The young horse hesitated, but Aurora nudged it forward with a gentle nicker. Elijah stood rooted to the ground as they approached, unable to speak, the weight of 3 years settling on his shoulders like fresh snow. Aurora stopped 20 feet from him. Her eyes met his, and in that single moment, everything he had feared and mourned seemed to lift. She remembered him. She had come back. And from the way she stepped aside, Elijah knew she had returned with a purpose. The young horse moved closer, but not too close. It watched Elijah with a deep curiosity, torn between fear and trust. Elijah spoke softly, the same quiet voice he had used with Aurora since she was a foal. "Easy, girl. Easy now. You're home. Both of you are home." Aurora lowered her head and touched his outstretched hand. Her warm breath wrapped around his fingers. Elijah's throat tightened. That simple touch felt like a prayer answered. He spent the next few days letting them settle. Aurora explored the ranch as if checking whether everything was as she remembered. The young horse stayed close, but gradually its curiosity pushed it forward. It was quick, sharp-eyed, and carried itself with a grace Elijah rarely saw in domestic horses. Sometimes he caught Aurora watching him while he worked, as if judging whether he was worthy of the gift she had brought home. Elijah soon realized something important. The young horse wasn't just Aurora's foal. It was born in the wild. That explained the cautious steps and the sharp instincts. Yet Aurora seemed determined to bridge the gap between two worlds. She pushed the young one gently toward Elijah, encouraged it to sniff tools, to stand near the fence, to accept his presence. One cold morning, while Elijah repaired a section of the corral fence, the young horse did something that stopped him mid-hammer swing. He dropped his hammer, and before he could kneel to pick it up, the young horse approached, grabbed the wooden handle carefully between its teeth, and set it beside him. Elijah sat back on his heels in shock. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. Aurora stood nearby, watching with what looked like pride. Elijah understood then. Aurora had taught the young one about humans. She had prepared it for this place, and she trusted Elijah to take the next step. But with that gift came a worry Elijah couldn't ignore. He was 71. His hands weren't as strong as they used to be. His breath ran shorter with every uphill walk. The ranch needed younger shoulders. And these horses, Aurora and her wild-born child, needed a future he wasn't sure he could give alone. That answer arrived quietly one evening when his nephew David rode up the long dirt road leading to the ranch. He came with his teenage daughter Lisa, a girl with quick eyes and a gentleness Elijah had always admired. Lisa had loved horses her entire life, though she'd never had a chance to live around them. The moment she saw Aurora and the young horse, something changed in her. She stood perfectly still, almost reverent, as the young horse approached her. It sniffed her sleeve, then her hand, then stepped even closer. Elijah had never seen it warm up to anyone that quickly, not even him. Lisa turned to her father. "Dad, I think she likes me." David looked at Elijah. "Uncle, maybe she needs someone young, someone who can give her years of what you gave Aurora." That night, long after supper, Lisa sat on the porch steps beside Elijah. "Uncle Elijah," she said quietly, "I know ranching is hard. I know it takes everything a person has, but I want to learn, and I want to help take care of them, especially the young one. If you'll teach me, I'll work harder than anyone." Elijah didn't answer right away. He looked out at Aurora grazing under the moonlight, the young horse pressed close to her side. Something deep in his chest loosened, a feeling he hadn't known in a long time. "Hope. All right," he said finally. "Let's see what you've got. Tomorrow morning you meet me at the barn before sunrise. A rancher starts early." Lisa grinned, and for the first time in years, Elijah felt the ranch breathe easy. But little did they know, Aurora had returned not only with a daughter, but with a purpose that would soon change all their lives forever. Winter settled over the Montana Valley with a quiet, steady grip. Frost touched the grass each morning, and the breath of every horse rose like pale smoke in the cold air. Lisa kept her word, meeting Elijah at the barn before sunrise every day. She mucked stalls, carried feed, hauled water, and never complained once. Aurora watched her closely, testing her with small challenges, like standing between her and the young horse, or stepping forward when Lisa approached. But each time Lisa stayed calm, gentle, steady. Day by day, Aurora's approval grew. The young horse, which Elijah now called Dawn, followed Lisa with bright curiosity. At first, Dawn would only come near when Aurora stood close. But as the weeks passed, she began to trust on her own. When Lisa brushed her for the first time, Dawn stood still, eyes soft, breathing slow and easy. Elijah watched from a distance, a quiet pride warming him more than the thick winter coat he wore. He knew then that Aurora had chosen correctly. Dawn had found her human. But with winter came danger no one expected. Late one dry afternoon, orange smoke rolled across the valley from the south. A wildfire had sparked in the timberline and was moving fast, pushed by a hard wind. David jumped onto the porch with fear in his eyes. "We have to evacuate," he said. "They're moving everyone out of the canyon." Elijah looked toward the barn where Aurora and Dawn stood. He knew domestic horses could panic and smoke. He also knew Aurora had lived wild for years and understood the land better than men with maps and hoses. As trucks rolled in to load livestock, Elijah made a decision no one else would have dared. "Let them go," he said softly. "Aurora knows how to survive. She'll keep Dawn safe." The fire roared through the forests for 3 long days. Helicopters thundered overhead. Ash fell like gray snow. Every night Elijah sat awake with his hat in his hands, staring toward the mountains, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken since boyhood. On the 4th morning, when the evacuation order lifted, he saddled up before dawn. Lisa climbed onto her horse beside him, determination set on her young face. Together they rode into the hills, following no trail except instinct. Aurora's instinct, the one Elijah trusted more than any map. Hours later, in a meadow untouched by fire, they found them. Aurora stood on a rise, Dawn beside her, both horses strong, unharmed, calm as if they had been waiting all along. A small band of wild horses grazed nearby, survivors like them. When Lisa called Dawn's name, the filly trotted to her with a gentle nicker. Elijah closed his eyes in relief. Aurora had done it again. Kept her daughter safe. Kept hope alive. Spring brought new beginnings. David purchased the ranch from Elijah with one condition. Elijah would stay as long as he wanted and teach Lisa everything he knew. The ranch thrived under the new arrangement. Lisa learned to ride the ridges, read the cattle, fix fences, and work dawn to dusk, without losing heart. Dawn grew into a powerful mare, agile as a mountain cat, calm as her mother, sharp-minded as any horse Elijah had ever known. Aurora became the quiet matriarch of the herd, guiding young horses, teaching Dawn lessons Elijah couldn't. She no longer worked cattle, but her wisdom shaped every day on the ranch, and she knew when the time came to pass the torch. One warm spring morning, she led Dawn into the barn and stood aside, looking straight at Lisa. In that silent moment, everyone understood. It was not just a gesture, it was Aurora's blessing, her way of saying, "She is ready, take care of her." Years rolled by like steady rivers. Lisa, now a young woman, ran most of the ranch work with confidence. Dawn carried her through mountain passes, across wide pastures, and through long cattle drives, with the steady heart of a horse born for both wild and home. Aurora spent her days grazing, watching, guiding, a living legend whose story was spoken around campfires across Montana. Elijah, nearing 80, often sat by the same fence line where Aurora first returned to him. He watched Dawn with her own foal now, and Aurora grazing nearby, her shadow long and peaceful in the evening light. He knew he had lived to see a miracle not just once, but many times. The rocking A Ranch stood stronger than ever, built on a bond that had survived blizzards, fire, and years apart. Folks said it was proof that the connection between a horse and a human was one of the greatest wonders of the West. And on quiet mornings, when the sun glowed gold over the mountains, Elijah swore he could hear Aurora's soft nicker drifting through the cool air. A reminder that love always finds its way home, no matter how far the journey.